I'm going to answer that question because Ryan Vassar, through this process, has become a dear friend of mine and a colleague, and Tony Busby is classless. What he did at that trial was classless. Ryan Vassar and all of us knew when we went to law enforcement on September 30th, 2020, we took firsthand eyewitness evidence to the FBI. The idea that Tony Busby or Ken Paxton think that the top 8 people in his agency going and sitting around a round table at the FBI and telling them their first-person accounts is not evidence is proof of how absurd Paxton's point was in this whole trial. And what he did to my colleagues was shameful, and Tony Busby should be ashamed of himself. He's a disgrace.
Well, and I'd like to add something, if I may, Ryan. You know, when Ryan was on the stand and got emotional, Ryan was thinking about his children. He was asking how this had impacted his family. He's a father with 4 small children and a wife who stays at home and raises those kids. When he got fired, he had a newborn baby at home and 4 young children. And Ryan was unemployed for 6 months. So did anybody talk about that from the defense side in the trial? Did they care about that? No. And I agree with Blake. It's shameful to mock somebody who's been through what we've been through, but particularly Ryan, because being out of work with a family at home to feed and a newborn baby, everybody can understand how hard that would be and how emotional that would be. Ryan's a human being just like we all are. This past 3 years has been extremely difficult. All we're asking for is for people to recognize what Ken Paxton did. We came to open court in the Senate. We took the oath. We testified. We told what we saw and what we knew and what Ken Paxton said and what he did. We told our account of his wrongdoing. Ken Paxton didn't even attend most of the proceeding. And I echo what Blake said. When does Ken Paxton go under oath? When does he come give a press conference to any media members who want to show up and ask direct questions from people who are educated on the evidence? He's out doing radio talk shows and going to friendly venues where he knows people will ask him non-threatening questions, where he won't be pressed on the evidence, where he won't be asked about what Blake said. Why did he start making efforts to pay Raj Kumar of Cupertino Builders? And Raj Kumar is an admitted business associate of Nate Paul's. Why did Ken Paxton start trying to pay him on the day that we had sent Brandon Kamek a cease and desist letter? Why did Ken Paxton have his blind trust make the payment on the day that we gone to the FBI? That's an amazing coincidence, isn't it? Will Ken Paxton come and do a press conference with all of you and with any other media members in Texas that want to ask questions, that want to look at the 4,000 pages of evidence that were filed on the Senate website by the House team? They worked hard all summer to gather all that evidence. Is Ken Paxton ever going to be pressed for answers about the facts in those records? There are extensive records about this. We stand behind our testimony. We challenge Ken Paxton to go in a neutral venue with the media members who know what they're talking about, who study the documents, who can ask probing follow-up questions, instead of him going and just asking, going to friendly venues, getting softball questions, and not being pressed for details. That's what he does. We stand behind our testimony, and what we want is justice, and we want the people of Texas to have an Attorney General that acts with integrity and good public policy. And I'd like to echo something Senator Kelly Hancock said in an interview last week. The people of Texas deserve both good public policy with integrity, and that's not too much to ask of an elected official, except in the case of Ken Paxton.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Phil?
Sure, thanks. Are y'all still in contact with federal investigators, and do you have any insights into...
We don't have anything to say about that. That's out of our control. So
all we can say is it's ongoing, but we can't comment more than that.
Yeah.
Phil?
One of the defense's witnesses, I think his name was Austin Kilhorn, when he was questioned, there was some confusion about who the state employees worked for, the people of Texas or Ken Paxton, the man. I was just curious about what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, I'll answer that because that came up the day I got fired. The current first assistant, Brent Webster, asked me that very question, who did I think I worked for? I said I worked for the state of Texas and the people of Texas, and that's the only correct answer. He told me he thought I was wrong. He thought I worked for Ken Paxton. We work for a boss as long as that boss stays within the law and within the rules of ethics. But when a boss goes out of bounds on the law and the rules of ethics, our loyalty is owed to the state and the people. And all 8 of us took that stand. We took it on principle. We weren't trying to manufacture a lawsuit. We weren't making anything up, despite some of the claims by the defense team in here. And we challenged them to show anything we said in there in our allegations about Ken Paxton's wrongdoing that's false. Thank you.
Mr. Brett, that's excellent. Which of the articles of impeachment do you think were the strongest going into this?
The abuse of office, I think, or the unfitness for office, I think, was the strongest. That's basically a roll-up of everything that Ken Paxton did for Nate Paul and everything that Nate Paul did for Ken Paxton. I thought that was the strongest, but there were several other ones. If I had to pick one, I think it was one of the later articles, but Ken Paxton is definitely unfit for office. The fact that 16 Republican senators think that the behavior that Ken Paxton has done to this state the last 3 years is the new model that we should live by is why we're fighting this lawsuit. It's why we will not give up, because we cannot allow this state to be corrupt. And as a conservative Republican who has been in the trenches for basically 20 years of conservative Republican politics, Ken Paxton is not my standard bearer. And I will keep fighting to make sure that our party does not become the party of corruption.
Were you all actively engaged in a political effort to defeat him when he's up for re-election?
I was not.
No.
No, really? When he comes up for re-election?
We'll cross that bridge when we get there.
You mentioned other evidence or materials that you think should come out that wasn't introduced in the impeachment trial that should come out in the trial court, like the receiver's report. Is there other material and evidence that you believe is be a strong part in the trial case that we haven't seen yet?
There is, and I think the House managers may know some of that, and I'll defer to them on whether they provide that to you, but there were other subpoenas where they did not get documents back that they should have, but I will defer to the very capable House managers to answer those questions.
Can you say more about what the nature of that was, or is that involving payments, or?
I can't.
Mr. Brickman, you had some of the strictest terms going into the settlement, and some of that included even an apology. Do you think, given this verdict, some of those terms, you might not be able to get from the other side? Does that impact whether you go along with settlement?
The apology, Taylor, was very important to me because I stood on principle that I want to make sure that any public official in the state of Texas, this never happens to them again. So I think the fact that Ken Paxton apologized for calling us rogue employees, the fact that he was willing to put in the preliminary agreement that we acted in a way we thought was right was very significant to show his culpable state of mind about how he's treated us for the last 3 years, going on all these radio talk shows, making up absurd lies. And he never gets questioned on it because, like Mark said earlier, he will never come do this. We will stand here for 2 hours if we wanted to, but we're not going to do that today. In fact, we're going to wrap up soon. But we are open books. We want, this entire time, we have wanted full transparency. Ken Paxton's legacy is the exact opposite of that.
Affect your willingness to go forward with settlement if you don't get some of those terms?
Potentially, it does.
Caroline, from CBS News. I wanted to ask, have you faced any personal threats since this has come out? Would you expand this since the impeachment trial? Could you expand on that at all?
I have not.
I have not.
Are you all worried about a chilling effect on any state employee in Texas who might need to report potential wrongdoing?
Absolutely, and I think that there are two very dangerous precedents that came out of this impeachment trial that I think those 16 Republican senators really need to think long and hard about. The first is, why would any public employee ever report their boss for wrongdoing based on how we've been treated for 3 years? It sends a chilling effect. The second piece, which I think has been overlooked a little bit, is Brent Webster, who's the first assistant, and Attorney General Ken Paxton, in February of 2021, went to a Senate Finance Committee, and Chairman Huffman asked a very specific question: who hired Brandon Kamek? Ken Paxton did what he usually does and said, "Here, Brent, you answer this question." And then Brent sat there for 2 minutes, I think the testimony was played in the trial, and flat out lied to the Senate Finance Committee, and I guess every member of the Senate, and the House for that matter. And the precedent from that is you can go in a Senate committee and lie, and there is no consequence. That is very dangerous. Very, very dangerous precedent. One more.
I have a follow-up. Sorry, about the mechanics of this lawsuit. So, looking ahead, let's say the legislature decides not to fund the settlement. I mean, they have decided not to, at least in this past session. And you end up winning this lawsuit, and a court decides, or a jury decides that, in fact, the Attorney General violated the Whistleblower Act. What are you going to get out of it? Like, will you be able to get some money, some monetary relief, or damages, or whatnot, or what would you get out of a jury declaring that, for example?
The two big things you get are your damages and your legal fees. The latter one is very important, and everyone watching should pay attention to this. If the Texas Supreme Court sends this back to trial, and if we go for years, the legal fees in this case are going to far exceed $3.3 million. And that brings up another point that has come out here as well. OAG is represented in this case by a firm called Lewis Brisbois, specifically an attorney named Bill Helfland. They've billed, I think, $600,000 in this case. And when Chris Hilton was in front of a House committee talking about this, he said, well, we had to hire outside counsel because there's some conflict in the office. That's not true. Judge Stone, who is, I think, the Solicitor General, is on the pleadings in this case, is working on this case. OAG has represented itself many times in the past in whistleblower cases. So the idea that OAG has to hire outside counsel in this case is just not true.
What about the granted countertops? Do you think the allegation that the defense definitively disproved that allegation would pro quo the kitchen remodel?
Here's what I know about the kitchen remodel. When we went to law enforcement on September 30th, we knew that Nate Paul was involved in the renovations of Ken Paxton's home. What we know now is the day after we went to the FBI, Ken Paxton wired $121,000 based on an invoice which was not even available then, sent to a company that's affiliated with Nate Paul, that's run by a guy named Raj Kumar, who's a convicted felon, who's done fraudulent transfers for Nate Paul. So when I hear these 16 Republican senators talk about there's no evidence or there's no smoking gun, that makes absolutely no sense. Ken Paxton was trying to cover up what we alleged by that payment. Whether they were granite countertops or not, I have no idea. Last question.
Mr. Bergman, Havens works with the Texan. He talks a lot about the Republican senators who voted against impeachment. What is your message to them after they sat through the trial and heard the evidence and then arrived at their belief that the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is not met?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
What would you say to senators who decided that the evidence presented at trial did not meet the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
I would say I strongly disagree with that for the reasons I just mentioned, specifically with that one invoice. But I think their vote in history will be talked about 20 years from now as a vote condoning corruption. So thank you all very much.
Let me add one thing, Blake, if I may. I just want to make this one additional statement. Ken Paxton has made statements in the past that this was some sort of a deep state conspiracy, that people infiltrated us into his office to set this up. He said that on the radio or some version of that again last week. That is absolutely untrue. This had nothing to do with politics by any of us. What this had to do with was we saw his illegal and unethical behavior. We had a duty, we had a responsibility to report it to law enforcement. He would not listen to us. We met with him, we talked to him, we emailed him, we spoke to him on the phone. I met with him in person for over 2 hours on September the 26th. And then we went to the FBI on September 30th when we found out that the 5-year lawyer he had hired had gotten 39 grand jury subpoenas, and that Nate Paul and his attorney were actively directing him to go after Nate Paul's adversaries, and he was serving those grand jury subpoenas on federal authorities, state authorities, and Nate Paul's litigation opponents. Politics had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. This is about principle. This is about respect for the law. This is about upholding the law. And I have 7 honorable colleagues. We went together. We made our report together for 4 hours. The idea that we had no evidence, when Ryan answered that question, he answered it the way anybody might answer it. Did we take a box of documents? Did we take DNA tests? Did we take fingerprints? No. We went in a hurry because of what was going on with those 39 grand jury subpoenas. It was improper, it was unethical, it was illegal. And we had to make a report, and we had to make it that day. We had eyewitness testimony, we had personal knowledge. That's admissible evidence in any court in Texas. We took that to the FBI, we did our duty, and we've been waiting 3 years for justice because we've been illegally fired. Thank y'all for being here.
Okay, all right. Sir, could I get a chance to, I got here about 1 minute later. I think I started 1 minute early. Could I talk to you for a few minutes?
I need to talk to them real quick. And who are you with?
New York Times.
To the U.S.-Mexico border, Tony Gonzalez leading a delegation of other lawmakers there talking about the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. Let's listen.